I recently received a message asking if I could do a video on learning to accept healing. The frustrating thing about being a human being is that we are really good at doing what we've always done, and we do what is most familiar to us, meaning that we act in familiar ways, we think in familiar ways, and we often feel familiar feelings. So we usually feel, act, think and do things in the same way as we did the day before and the day before that, because it's the way we learn and it's the way we conserve energy and it's the way we most efficiently go about our lives. The problem being that if you are somebody who has a lot of stress and tension and anxiety, you are somebody that feels crappy most of the time because you're dealing with a lot of panic and anxiety, that can end up being the most familiar state to you. And so it sort of feels unnatural to start feeling good again. So we're trying so hard to feel good, but what we're really so used to is feeling bad. And so feeling good feels really unnatural and feels really weird because we're not used to feeling that way. So as human beings, we tend to move away from the unfamiliar and move towards the familiar. So you might unconsciously and inadvertently be moving more towards tension and stress and anxiety and panic because that's what you know. So how do you break out of that cycle? How do you then go from feeling crappy to feeling better if what you're going to do is keep moving towards what you know? Excuse me, I've just noticed my camera is sort of tilting. So the great thing about being a human being who moves towards what is familiar is that you can learn a new state of being, but you have to start acting in that way to begin with. So in order to get to a place where you feel like you're healing and you feel like you are getting better and you're feeling better and you're acting and thinking and behaving differently than the tension and panic and the stress that you're used to, in order to get to that place, you have to start acting, behaving, and thinking differently. But you have to acknowledge that it's going to feel unnatural and weird to begin with. And that can be the thing that pushes most of us away from those things that are supposed to make us feel better. So to give you a workable example, something that I kind of knew was going to make me feel better was exercise and doing yoga specifically. I really felt a pull towards doing yoga. I felt like it was going to help me, but I was terrified of going to a yoga class and putting myself in a situation where I was in a room full of people with mats all around me, and it would have been awkward to leave the room if I panicked. And the first couple of times I went to a yoga class, I felt panicked and I felt uncomfortable and I felt tense, and it was hard for me to let go and relax because I was so focused and so conscious on the fact that I couldn't escape easily and that it felt uncomfortable. And this isn't because it was a bad thing. This isn't because it was a poor decision to go to yoga. It was because it was uncomfortable and unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things aren't bad, but we just tend to feel naturally like they are because it takes a lot of energy to do what is unfamiliar and what is unknown. And our body is like, ugh, that feels weird. I don't like that. Think about writing with your non-dominant hand. It feels yuck and it looks weird as well. The writing that you do from your non-dominant hand is rarely legible. So writing from your dominant hand feels natural because that's what you always do. You could teach yourself to write with your non-dominant hand if you did it enough, and you would eventually get used to how that feels. It wouldn't feel so unnatural anymore. But to begin with, it feels yucky, it feels exhausting, it feels weird, and it doesn't look right. And that's what it's going to be like when you first start to move towards healing or move towards recovery. And the reason I put recovery in air quotes is because I always like to remind people that recovery doesn't necessarily mean never experiencing panic, never experiencing anxiety, never experiencing uncomfortable feelings. Recovery might look different to the way that you think it's going to look. I've got some videos on this. I will link them. But yeah, you can start to move towards recovery and move towards feeling better and move towards healing, but you're going to have to do things that feel uncomfortable and feel unnatural and strange in order to get there. And I think that the first part of that really is in acknowledging that it's not going to feel like healing to begin with. I'm always reminded of this every time I go to therapy. And honestly, like, you think therapy is supposed to feel good and it's supposed to help, but for me, I always find that therapy feels super uncomfortable and I really don't like it until later down the track when I'm like, oh, that actually really helped. But at the time, usually I'm like, I don't like talking about these uncomfortable things. It makes me feel strange and yucky and ugh, but I know it's good for me and I know it helps. And so often what we can think is our body communicating to us that something isn't right. Sometimes our body is just communicating to us that it doesn't feel familiar. And that's not really a terrible thing. Sometimes that can be a really good thing, especially if what is familiar to you is stress, discomfort, panic, anxiety, and feeling crappy. That means that when you start to chase feeling good and when you start to go after things that decrease your stress and decrease your tension, you think that those things are going to feel good immediately, but they may not. But that doesn't mean that you stop doing them. That doesn't mean that you go, oh, this means this isn't right for me, I should just go back to the things I was doing every day before. It means that you need to figure out, what are the things that I want to move towards in order to help with my healing? What are the things that I feel intuitively are going to be good for me? And just because I experience panic or anxiety when I'm doing those things, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. It just means that they're unfamiliar. I think another aspect of learning to accept healing is doing a lot of self-inquiry and a lot of reflection. So for me, that meant a lot of journaling. If you're not somebody who likes to journal, then maybe you can just ask yourself a prompt every week or something like that. Calm Community is going to be good for you because there's always a weekly prompt that's designed to sort of aid in self-reflection. But spend some time at least once a week thinking about where you want to go in your life, where you want to be, and figure out the actions that are going to take you there, and then start doing those things. And like I said, just because they might feel uncomfortable, it doesn't mean that they're wrong for you. It just means that they're unfamiliar. The more that you do those things every day, the more that you make feeling good or going after feeling good, the more you make that a part of your daily routine, the more that will become something that is familiar to you. And I can tell you categorically that I went from feeling really shitty every day, really panicked every day, feeling like I would never be able to stop fearing those sensations in my body, and always being aware of when I needed the bathroom, and always scanning my body for am I going to panic? Do I feel panicked? Do I feel anxious? Just always feeling tense and ugh. I went from feeling like that every day to just having every day feeling pretty normal, I would say. Every now and then I have a shitty day, but for the most part, I'm just going about my life. Just not really thinking about any of those things that I used to stress about. And it's because I have now gotten into the habit of living like that. But it took me time. It took me practicing living like that day in and day out for it to become the new normal for me. And I think that's where a lot of us forget that there is a gap of time that we need to work at it, and that it's gonna feel uncomfortable. We kind of feel like we should be able to go from point A to point C, and we think that maybe a medication or something is going to be able to take us there, from there to there, and it's going to solve all our problems. But we forget that there's that point B. There's that work that we actually need to do where it feels messy and it feels uncomfortable and it feels unfamiliar. But if we do that work, if we're willing to do that work, then we are going to start feeling better. We're going to start feeling different to the way that we feel now, which feels crappy and yuck. That is if you're feeling crappy and yuck now, not trying to push those feelings on you. But so yeah, I know that it can feel hard to even begin to imagine what feeling better feels like if you are somebody who has felt anxious and panicked for a long time and you feel like you've been stuck in that cycle for ages. You can learn to feel differently, but you have to start acting in those ways that are going to support those feelings. And you have to remember that they're not going to feel the way you expect them to feel initially. It's going to take time to get there. Stick with it, hang in there. Come to Calm Community every week if you want to. It's going to help, hopefully. And hang out here, and there's heaps of really lovely supportive people usually in the comment section. So if you need help, ask for it. I hope you're all doing really, really well. I hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.